It's the third Sunday of the month, so it means that it's time for MedSchool Hacks. So guys, in this video, I'm going to be talking about the books that I used or that I found useful in my first 2 years of med school. I love books. I personally love books and I love to collect books, but books are expensive. So I didn't bought much books. I had a good deal when I first entered med school. I had a good deal, so I bought this from my senior and she sold me about, I think, like 10 or 11 books for 400 ringgit. If you buy one book, it will be around like 100 plus, sometimes almost 100. And the books were in very good condition, minimal highlighting. Most of them weren't highlighted at all, and no notes at the side. So it was as if buying brand new. The thing is, I didn't use all of those books, and some of them were a waste. Not to say that they weren't useful, but personally, I didn't prefer those books. I had my own preference and my own choices. I don't really know how's med school like in other country, but in Malaysia, for most of the med school, at least in Malaysia, we have 5 years, and the first 2 years are our preclinical years, and then the remaining 3 will be our clinical years with the posting in the hospitals and the clinics. So for the first 2 years, it's just theory. Well, purely theory. We will have some early clinical examination, but not so in depth. We will have year 1 and year 2. When I was in year 1, we had 6 blocks, and when I was in year 2, we had 7 blocks. What is blocks? Blocks are like, I guess, in clinical sense, you would say rotations, but not rotations actually, because we didn't learn the traditional way whereby we go by anatomy, physiology, biochemistry, pharmacology, then pathology, microbiology. No, we actually incorporated everything in one system. So for example, we will study cardiovascular system. So in it, you have anatomy, biochemistry, physiology, pathology, microbiology, parasitology, and pharmacology, like that. So during my first year, we actually had 6 blocks, and the first 3 were introductory blocks, like basic medical sciences, basic medical diseases, and genetics and immunology. We only entered the proper block when we were in our 4th block, which was cardiovascular block, hematology block, and respiratory block. Basically, we didn't go 1 year where we had only anatomy, and then the next year we had only pathology, like that. For every block, I will be continuously using these books. Now, before I begin to tell you what kind of books I use for each subject, my go-to book is the first aid for the USMLE Step 1. This one. I had it when I was in my first year, and up till now, you can see I love to wrap my books. So it was very useful for me, and I think it will be now. I haven't started my clinical year yet. It was very useful for me where they divided it into several sections. So you have your high yield general principles. So you will have biochemistry, immunology, microbiology, pathology, pharmacology, public health sciences part. And then you also have your blocks, like you see cardiovascular, endocrine, gastrointestinal, hematology. When you go to that block, you see it's very organized, whereby they have the embryology part of it first, and then you have the anatomy. So you learn it in sequence, and it's not so hard to grasp and understand. But I would say that this book is only, well, it's not to say that it's not useful. It's very, very useful, and I'm so thankful I actually found this book when I was in my first year. Like, after you have gone through all your notes, like you have really studied, then you use this book, I would say, because it is not something that you would want to rely on 100%. It should be your go-to book after you have studied, like really studied. It's a refresher for you. Apart from this first aid for the USMLE Step 1, I use 2 other books, and I will insert the picture here because I don't actually have the physical copy. Sometimes I would borrow it from my friend, and most of the time I would use it in my iPad because I store more books online. It's easier for me to carry when I go to class or when I go somewhere. It's easy for me to refer. and also books are expensive. That's why. My next two go-to book would be First Aid for the Basic Sciences General Principles and First Aid for the Basic Sciences Organ Systems. So before I actually go through this book, I like to go through that book. I put it alongside with my notes. After I read my notes, I will read through that book. Now, do I depend on my lecturer's notes? I read them, but sometimes, like how different lecturers will have different style, and some style you just don't really understand, some style you like. So for me, I prefer to go back to the book. So I will still read it, but it's a bit hard for me to grasp. Okay, so I'm gonna go to embryology first. For embryology, I refer to this book. This is Langman's Medical Embryology book. My seniors told me that this book is really hard to understand, but personally for me it's not hard to understand. It's easier for me to understand. The way they write it, it's like in a story form, so it's not so hard for me to grasp. After embryology, then I will move on to anatomy, and for anatomy, I don't exactly have a book that I study for anatomy because in my university, it's not to say that we don't focus on anatomy. We do focus on anatomy, but it's not hard for me to grasp anatomy. So usually I just refer to my lecture's notes where they will have the drawing and the label, and it's easy for me. I will just read through that. However, when I went to musculoskeletal block and neurology block, it was hard for me, the anatomy, so I had to get different books. And so for musculoskeletal block, I referred to this book, Gray's Anatomy for Students. See, it's very thick and very heavy. And now for Gray's Anatomy for Students, they have all the blocks. They have every part of the body except nervous system. And it's not to say they don't have nervous system. Everything is sort of like, it's hard for me to find just on the nervous system itself. Like if you want to talk about bones and muscles, this is your go-to book. However, when you go to neurology block, you want to talk about the brain and the spine and all the nerves. The book that I use is actually Textbook of Human Neuroanatomy, Fundamental and Clinical by Inderby Singh. I'll insert the picture here. And I don't have the physical copy of this book. I only have the PDF copy of this book. And for me, it was very useful because I take time to understand. And like I said earlier, it's not hard for me to actually grasp anatomy. Not to say that it's easy, but it's not hard for me to grasp. And for neurology and musculoskeletal, that was just too much for me, and I can't remember. I don't actually have a good memory. The explanation and the notes in that book is actually very useful, and it's very concise and straight to the point. For me, it's easy to understand. So that was my go-to book during that block. For histology, I had a very good lecturer when it comes to histology, and her notes were very complete. They had lots of picture and it was easy for me to understand. So I never actually had to refer to another textbook. So I won't insert a textbook here. So now for biochemistry, my go-to book would be this Lippincott's Illustrated Reviews Biochemistry. And for my first and second year, I continuously go back to this book again and again and again. And although for those of you who's watching my video and you go to the same university as I am, you would know that the notes that were given by the lecturer are actually from this book, and sometimes it's identical. But for me, I love to go back to books, as I said, and I prefer the explanation here. Biochemistry is actually not that hard, but for me, like I said, memory is hard for me. Like I can't really remember stuff in detail or for so long. So if it comes to the cycle, I have trouble, and I usually have to think of mnemonics to remember it by. Now we will go to microbiology and parasitology. So for microbiology, honestly, for microbiology and parasitology, those are my weak subjects until now. So how do I study microbiology and parasitology? When I'm in class, and I have a very, very bad attention span. There are times when Actually, most of the times I will fall asleep in class. For microbiology and parasitology, before I actually read through the notes, because sometimes I think the notes given by the lecturers are too thick, so I would see what are the diseases, and I will look them up in the internet. I will read through Mayo Clinic, WebMD, and certain articles to actually get the general idea what the disease is about, its symptoms, causes, prevention, complication, treatment. Then only I would go through the notes, because I feel like the notes is quite complicated for me. And there are times when I would refer to the textbook, and the textbook that I would refer to is MIMS Medical Microbiology. I don't really refer much. And the thing is, and for parasitology, I would do the same thing. I would look through WebMD or Mayo Clinic, or just look through some articles and understand what it's about, and then I would go through the lectures notes. So for parasitology, I would usually draw out how the parasites will look like, because parasites are the fungi. How the parasites would actually look like, because it's hard for me to remember. Yeah. Okay, so moving on, we will go to pathology. So for pathology, I would refer to Robin's Basic Pathology. I don't have the book in physical copy. I usually refer to it on my iPad, and I would just go through it only once. I don't read through over and over again. I would only go through it once and make sure I understand the basic of it, and then alongside my lecturer's notes, I would refer to this book. Yeah, I never stray away from this book. I always come back to this book. This is like my go-to book. I can't live without this book. You should personally get this book. I'm just saying. For pharmacology, if you want to just remember the medicine, and honestly, pharmacology, like I said, for me, it's very hard for me to memorize, so I don't actually remember the medicine and the mechanism of action and so on. If you want to remember, like just get a quick idea of what the medicines are in that particular block, then yeah, you should refer to this. However, if you want a better explanation, I would refer to Lippincott's Illustrated Reviews Pharmacology. So I'll insert a picture here, and I always refer to that. Like, that is my go-to book, because the way the notes are written and explained is very concise, it's very straight to the point, it's easy to understand, and the language is simple. And then after that, I would go through this book. And I like to write extra notes on the side which are not found in this book. If I don't go to this book, sometimes I would go to the other book, which is the First Aid for the Basic Sciences, Organ and Journal Principles. If I'm already going through my system blocks like cardiovascular and all, I would refer to organ systems. If I'm just still in the introductory phases, then I would just go through the general principles. For physiology, I always go through this book. It is Human Physiology, an Integrated Approach, D. Unglob. I'm not sure if it's D. Unglob or... Okay, I'm very sorry if I pronounced the name wrongly, but it's D. Unglob Silverthorn, this book. Yeah. I would say though some of the information are missing here. Like, this book is good if you want to just get the gist of what the physiology of that particular block is about. You go through this first, and then you go through the lecturer's notes, because I noticed that when I read through my lecturer's notes, I don't quite understand. But after I've read through this and I read through my lecturer's notes, it's easier. However, I noticed that my lecturers, their explanation is more in-depth, and it's more important, because in exam you have to write essays and all. Most of the information are not here, so many people would recommend another book, which is the Medical Physiology by Guyton and Hall. That book is very in-depth and very thorough, the explanation. However, it's too much for me. So, not to say I don't like reading, I do love reading. However, sometimes there's just so many things to read about, you don't have time, especially if the block that is given to you is only like 4 to 6 weeks, and you're studying more than one subject, so that's why. So for immunology and genetics, we only had one block on it, so I referred to this because in this part here we have immunology, and I noticed that some of the chapters that I studied in this block are found in biochemistry, so I would just refer to biochemistry, and the immunology part is here found in this book. So okay guys, I hope this video is useful for you, and for those of you out there who have gone through this phase, do comment down below what are the kind of books do you use. Do you prefer to use books, or do you prefer to use it online? Personally, for me, I prefer to read the physical copy, but it's really heavy and it's not easy to bring around. So for me, it's better to refer it online, and it's also expensive to buy. So if it's online, you can share it with your friends. So yeah, I hope this video is useful for you. For those of you who are just starting out, good luck, and see you next month. Bye.